Yeah, so welcome back. Previously we uh, had rented a cargo hauler. It was the something Max, and I think I spent way too much money renting it. It was unnecessary. I'm not going to do that many missions. But in any case, last time we were talking about that we were going to talk about Eleanor Stump's Thomistic account of love, or medieval account of love, Thomistic medieval, whatever it is. And we previously discussed two uh, previous accounts. They were the relational account of love, and they were the volitional account of love. Uh, Also, we the Misc Freelancer Max. That's what I rented. But so sorry about all the noises. Eventually, I'm gonna have to get a proper mic uh, set up. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do that yet, but it'll happen. Anyway, so like I said, we looked at two accounts of love. There's the relational account of love, and then there's the volitional account of love. And we talked about two criticisms of those views and why they didn't work regarding the relational. Well, I'm sorry, we're going to talk about the relational account now. We talked previously about the volitional account of love, and we also talked about the responsiveness account of love. And like I said, both of those were not without their problems, namely with the responsiveness account of love. That's an account of love where someone is responsive um, to some quality, some intrinsic quality about you. Of course, we would know why if it were an account, if a responsive account of love talked about being responsive to extrinsic qualities, why that would fail. I think that's pretty obvious. But more importantly, is this question about why the responsiveness account fails in regards to intrinsic qualities, right? And we said that people change, and that's a fact of life. You grow older, you grow taller, you grow wiser. Sometimes you're less fun, blah blah blah, yada yada. And so, given these changes that everyone goes through, um, there's a worry about what happens to how do you explain those kinds of love that persist across those changes. So think about loves such as parents and children, right? Children grow older, and parents don't grow out of love with them. So the responsiveness account doesn't explain love in that sense, or it doesn't explain love. And then there is the volitional account of love, where let's say that someone says, "Oh, the reason why I love you is because I'm your parent, I'm your father, I'm your mother, whatever it is." And then the case would be, well, that says nothing about me, and that doesn't really explain why you should love me or anything like that. And that says more about you. But you can imagine that the person, or so we're talking about the lover and the beloved. You can imagine that the lover doesn't even have to know the beloved in order to love them on the volitional account, right? And so that's problematic too. So now we're going to look at Nicholas Kolodny's account of love, and this is the relational account of love. And this account of love is going to lead to some pretty strange consequences, if true, right? But they're kind of fun ones to think about at least. And so we'll talk about that as soon as I get out of the ship. Just to, oh, that's not what I wanted to do. to kind of give some context, however, and why it looks like I'm playing a video game and talking about these different accounts of love, is because I'm trying to think about what it takes to simulate love. So often when we think about MMOs, mass multiplayer online games, we largely think of these as large simulation environments, right? And so right now, let's take what I'm doing. So if you look at my character, I've got I'm wearing a ton of armor, and to be honest, this armor is completely unnecessary. I just don't feel like taking it off. I've got a giant backpack. Inside the backpack, I've got some food and some medical equipment and items. I've got some hydration packets or water and stuff like that. And then I have 2 guns hanging off the backpack. So now, if you look behind my character here, there's a giant ship, or what looks to be a ship. And I'm only explaining this for people who are not familiar with this genre of video game. Pretty sure that those of you who are familiar know exactly what's going on. But in regards to this kind of slightly pedantic, well, not pedantic, but this over explanation of what I'm doing, I'm trying to give some context as to what's happening here. But this is an MMO, namely the MMO Star Citizen. Economically, probably one of the most successful video games, and it hasn't been released. And what I mean by successful, I mean in terms of capital raised, but then also, but it's not right. Anyway, I'll just stop there. But so, how I like to think of MMOs, I like to think of them as large simulation engines, right? And so we can simulate different aspects of life or imagined life. And so in this case, I'm simulating a sort of lifestyle of a cargo hauler. So think of something like someone who drives long haul transportation missions. I guess nowadays, like if you've ever driven for Uber or Lyft or something like that, it's synonymous with that, and right. But this is just a simulation. It's obviously not real life, but it's a very detailed, or it can be a very detailed simulation. Thinking of how we think of it. The problem is, though, it's not always the case that we simulate every aspect of life. One example of this is simulating the reasons why someone would perform this kind of activity. Now, there are the easy answers, of course, which would include things like, I like being able to pay the rent in the area of town that I live in, and in order to do so, I have to, work various jobs. We could think of other sorts of reasons, such as I just like to work. I enjoy working. I enjoy this kind of work. Maybe I have a trust fund or an inheritance that I could live off of. But instead, I would rather work and feel as though I'm earning my own keep, earning my own living. So those are some reasons. But then there are other reasons, too, that are probably a little bit more difficult to qualify, right, to understand. And these would be, let's imagine that I have a sick child at home, and so this is an extra gig that I'm taking on because I need the extra income. Or let's imagine that my parents are aging, and we just discovered that they have some expensive illness or something like that, and so I'm taking on extra engagements. Imagine, there was some kind of natural disaster or something recently, and as such, I've got to take on these extra engagements in order to in order to repair the roof, the damage on the roof that I incurred owing to this natural disaster, so on and so forth. All right, so one of the things I would like to argue, especially given that today is Father's Day, is I would like to imagine that this is that my character is a parent and who is acting selflessly in in order to take care of their children, right? To be able to provide for and feed and you know uh, give their children a good life and pay for their educations and all that kind of good stuff, right? So in that case, either this is my career or this is temporary gig work, right? Or extra gig work rather, and my career is something else. But just for the sake of it, I'm going to imagine that it is my career, um, and primarily I'm going to imagine that because this is largely one of the only things I know how to do sufficiently well in this game. So whenever I've tried mercenary missions or bounty hunter missions and things like that, I haven't been too successful with those. And right now, I would like to, um, yeah, I would eventually like to do other types of missions, but I think in order to be able to do so, I would have to have a better vehicle, like some kind of fighter or something like that, medium fighter or something. Anyway, so that's me. That's the gist of it. I am packaging boxes, loading boxes onto this cargo hauler, and on one hand, it seems like a kind of cool job just because I'm dealing with all this technology and things like that. But we have to imagine that, you know, even though to us this looks like it might be a kind of prestigious um, activity, just because, like, I would have to know how to operate this heavy equipment and seems to be particularly skilled as a particularly skilled kind of labor, so on and so forth. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I don't think. Would imagine 1,000 years into the future, this might be fairly easy to do. Regarding space travel and operating sensitive and technical equipment in order to complete missions and other. So anyway, you get the idea. I'm sure. Well, according to lore, at least, also there are different politicians and there are professors and there are people who teach and there are people who and there are doctors and there are neurosurgeons and neuroscientists and people who are working on the cloning technology that if I were to die, I would clone into a new body. My memories and things like that would transfer into a new body. And so there are people there that are doing that kind of work, which I guess that would be fairly prestigious. But here I am. I am a long haul trucker, and the distances I travel aren't even that great. I think like if I were more skilled, I could trade commodities between, say, the Pyro system and the Stanton system, for instance, and like really make big bucks. But I'm not all that skilled, so I think equivalently, I'm kind of like just an Uber driver here, and that's what it is. But let's so like there's some real life analogies. For instance, if I grind really hard at this task, if I work really hard and I get really good at it, I could eventually take on more responsibilities, riskier jobs, those that pay better. Yeah, I could afford larger ships. Ultimately, when Star Citizen begins to, enable us to contract out our own jobs, then I could start contracting out my own labor to others, and so on and so forth. So, anyway, that is, so somewhere in that mix of of reasons is why I'm using Star Citizen to kind of talk about uh, varying accounts of varying philosophical accounts of love. Um, I the idea is if we can simulate being a truck driver, um, then why not simulate being a loving person or a caring person or a conscientious person or simulate being a generous individual, so on and so forth. So yeah, this is nice. All right. Okay, so Kolodny's account of love is called the relational account. And what do we mean by relational account? Well, have you ever loved someone primarily because of how much time you've spent with them? So imagine that you spend a lot of time working in close proximity with an individual, and your love is not a response to qualities that they have. It's not like you came to know them more on account of spending so much time with them. But this is different, right? Because what this is, you just invested a lot of time into that friendship or into getting to know them, and it's the time that you put the most value in, you place the most value in. So this is let me take a break while I read this quote. Kolodny's own suggestion is that a lover does not have a reason for loving her beloved, but that the reason is the lover's relationship with the beloved. We can call Kolodny's account the relational account of love, and by relationship in this context, Kolodny has in mind a connection that persists over time and that has a history of interactions between the persons so connected. So, and here is his account in his own words. The reason one has for loving Jane, in any case, is that she is one's daughter, sister, mother, friend, or wife. This proposal avoids the problems that plague the views that cite non-relational features as reasons for love. For instance, the fact that Jane is one's daughter is a reason for loving her, but not a reason for loving a substitute with identical non-relational features. And this proposal identifies the distinctive reasons for love that views such as Frankfurt ignore at their peril. So why do you love your children on this account? Well, it's easy. You love your children because they're your children. You have a relationship with them, right? And so love is a part of the office. So imagine that you're a secretary, or let's say that you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Well, in this case, there are certain states of being that you're expected to perform, or there are certain ways in which you're expected to perform. And what Kolodny is suggesting is that relationships have their own emotional attitudes that are connected to them, or these positions. So, like, positions have, what would we call it? Have their own emotional states that are connected with those positions. So if a mother doesn't love her children, or a father doesn't love his children, or doesn't show that emotional connection with his children, we think, oh, that's bizarre, right? That's there's something that's notable in that. Now, I get, like, some people have said that for whatever reason they can't feel certain attachments. But, you know, so for instance, if someone, like postpartum, uh, parents who are suffering from postpartum have difficulty emotionally attaching to a new child, right? And we don't just leave it at that and say that that's a desirable state of affairs, or that's that's a state of affairs that we should expect. Rather, we say, when we see that happening, that there's something notable about that, and we try and get the person help or counseling or something like that. And to be sure, there's something very different from shaming or blaming, right? Taking some kind of attitude of blame toward them. Rather, in the same way we wouldn't blame someone for experiencing symptoms from COVID, we're not going to blame someone for being unable to have like a emotional attachment to their children, but we're going to try and help them, right? So anyway, so when we're talking about this relational account to love, love is explained by the relationship, by the position that one holds. It's not now. There's probably some easy objections to it, but first, I think before we talk about those objections, it might be helpful to try and ward them off before we get to them. So one of the things when we're talking about relationships, we're talking about special sorts of value that we place into some kind of circumstance or situation, or perhaps an emotional state. So if we think of love as an emotional state, and we say that James loves John, or Jenny, James and John, or Jenny, whatever. What we're saying is that they're placing a special kind of value. There's a special kind of value that we can see, right? And either this is a normative statement, or it's and what we mean by normative is that there's a kind of norm that John ought to have a certain feeling for Jenny, or So we're talking about a normative status, but it can also be a descriptive one too. And what we mean by descriptive is just that it just happens to be the case that John places a lot of value, or John sees a lot of value in Jenny, or what have you, right? So we're talking about love, and we're talking about special values. Now, why is that significant? Well, I think so let's so sometimes on various I'm going to skip the example that Kalani gives, that she discusses about Kalani. I think one of the ways to see what might be troublesome for Kalani's account is taken from Dante's Inferno, right? And so in Dante's Inferno, it turns out that he describes what he calls a love affair, or what some people have described as a love affair, between him and a woman named Beatrice. And for those of you who don't know a lot about Dante's Inferno, so Dante's Inferno was one of the first epic, I'm not going to say that, 'cause I'm not sure, but It was an incredible piece of poetry written at the time that describes a kind of imagined descent into into hell, and so Dante's describing this vision he has of going to hell. And you know, what he learned through the process and things like that. Uh, One second. Okay. You know, I think it's this is why I hate doing this. It just takes me forever. Some people are really good at this, and it takes me god awful long time. All right. Yeah. So see, I'm stacking boxes, and I forgot that these can be stacked 3 high. I don't even think I need to stack them 3 high. Stack them 3 high. The reason why is because I don't think I have enough boxes on contract in order to fill the entire hall. This is a pretty large hall. Like I said, I wasted more money than I needed to in order to rent this. It was like 85,000 AEUC. And I could probably have done these missions. What I wanted to do is just, you know, like knock out 5 contracts. I think I have 6 at the moment. They're each about 50,000 AEUC each. I wanted to knock out 6, fly down, come back up, knock out 6 more. You know, and in the course of an hour, make like 600,000 AEUC. And I think with just one more mission, I would have been able to buy a Gladius. But as you can see, it's taking me a lot longer than it really needs to, and just because. And I think if I take too long, it's going to start bugging out, which means like some of these boxes won't contract properly, and I'll lose the promised reward, you know, and it will be all my fault. So this is, by the way, this is, yeah, anyway. So, you know, before we continue on with the love affair between Dante and Beatrice, let's see if we can try and connect like these 3 different accounts of love with Star Citizen. So I think like normally what I would rather do in regards to connecting them is kind of like walk around a station or something and get some shots that would resemble perhaps I don't know, me giving a gift to someone as an expression of my love, or me doing something noble for someone, and then if they ask why did you do that noble thing, I could say, well, isn't it obvious? I love you. No, that would be weird. But it would be kind of hilarious, I think, too. So that's the difficulty I'm having, is like, how do you simulate like those states of, like, how do you simulate like meaningful relationships in a video game, right? I think the closest we might see to something like this is the game One Life, 1 Hour, One Life, which is really interesting. Essentially, you're born, and you necessarily rely on the community. Um, you rely on other players in order to come of age, where you can kind of protect yourself, but you're never really completely at a point where you can protect yourself. And the reason why is because you need to you need to grow crops, you need to water them, you need to defend the village from wild animal attacks, you need to source new, you need to find new resources, and so in order to play the game well, in order to survive, and the idea is to survive to a certain number of years, right? To to be able to play the game for an entire hour, right? And the way you play the game for an entire hour is by surviving, and each minute is a year, and so you want to live to 60 years old, but not just yourself, obviously. You want like a good state of affairs is one where in which your civilization, your society survives uh, a period of time, right? And so that's the fun part, is to, you're working together with these people that you do not know. You don't get to choose who you're going to build a society with. You're just kind of foisted into their lives, and they're kind of foisted into yours by circumstances beyond yours or anyone else's control, except perhaps whoever designed the algorithm that determines who gets placed where. But the idea is you need to work with these individuals who you have no previous relationship with, in order to make your society last, right? And to progress and to grow and develop. But even then, I feel like one of the problems that might come from that is a potential to trivialize relationship, because here there's a very practical benefit to exercising good relationships, right? Or good relational virtues, compassion and generosity and things like that. Because if you do all those things, you're more likely to be a part of a civilization that thrives and does well. But that there's a worry that would take the intrinsic benefit of the relationship out of context. Now, of course, it adds another question. It says something like, well, so what, right? And there are actually moral theories that do a similar thing. So, like, morality is cooperation theory, and the idea is that morality evolved in human beings to promote survival, right? Survival of the species and of the individual. And so individuals who exercise better relational values who exercise good relational values do better than individuals who do not. So individuals who show generosity and care and concern and things like that, they're going to be more successful from a natural selection point of view than others. And then over time, their children have succeeded and had children of their own, and propagate the genes that made possible those particular character traits and things like that, right? Those successful character traits. Like I said, like that, the worry would be that trivializes relationships by giving a practical benefit rather than an intrinsic one. And so someone might say, so what? That that this is a descriptive account. it's not a normative account, right? And someone might say, well, what about well-being? You know, like well-being accounts of morality and things like that. What about those? Well, I mean, does it really matter what we call it as long as my genes are surviving to the next generation? It doesn't matter, right? No. The only thing that matters is that my DNA gets passed on and my rival's doesn't. That is the only thing we care about. And that's just a depressing view, right? Perhaps people with higher IQs than me or more intelligent would say, I'm fine with that. And you know, there's a kind of rationality to that. I'm okay with that. That's okay. You know, life is a chess game, and the winner is the one who gets all his DNA into the right places, or her DNA. You know, okay, yeah. I heard the greatest line the other day. Actually, it was hilarious. So they were talking about theories of law. You know, what is law? And this is kind of an offhanded remark, but apparently law is power with just a thin veneer of bullshit. Right? And so the idea is that, yeah, only the powerful get to write the legal codes. And there's not really any and there's no normative standard that a good legal code will follow, except that it promotes the benefit of whoever's writing the legal code, whatever that benefit is. So maybe welfareist or something like that. But anyway, and the reason why it's a thin veneer of bullshit is because you're just justifying the fact that the powerful get to write the rules. Now, someone might say, "Yeah, that sounds about right. If you don't like it, then become powerful." And then once you become powerful, you can give the rule making ability to whoever you choose. That would be very interesting. So as it turns out, it's a good thing that I did hire out the freelancer max, because if I had not done so, I would not have had enough room to fit all these boxes. Now, I think if I had landed on a different area, I could have, like at ArtCorp, I could have hired out the thing with the yay, where you put the boxes on the outside. I forget the name of it. Hopefully I'll be able to fit my Argo in the hole once I load it with all these boxes. So, like I said, the thing about the love affair, quote unquote, love affair between Beatrice and Dante. So here are the facts of the case. So Dante was 9 years old, and Beatrice was not much older than Dante. So right, so maybe she was 7 or 8. I have no idea. And the thing is, he saw her, right? He got a view of her, and then he saw her once more when she was a teenager, right? But in spite of having only seen her from a distance twice in his entire life, um, and the fact that Beatrice died when she was 24 years old, um, Dante was never able to have like what we would think of as a relationship with her, right? So he married someone else when he was early 20s, something like that, and she married someone when she was a teenager still, when she was still a teenager. Um, Dante never met her, never got to talk to her, didn't get to know her or anything like that, and yet, having seen her twice in his life, he fell in love with her and would immortalize her in his greatest work, his greatest writing, right? The Inferno, the Purgatorio. Um, so, like, how do we make sense of that? And one of the problems is that, and I don't know where I fall on this. Well, I think I do know where I fall on this. Like, utter confusion. Um, but this is supposed to be uh, an example of a love affair between two individuals. And it's an example that is not able to be explained by the relational account because there was no relationship between the two individuals. And so we're left trying to understand how is it that they had a love affair? How do we explain the kind of love between them? I mean, I don't know. You know, the cynical part of me wants to say, well, that's obviously infatuation, or I wouldn't say lust, you know, because he saw her once when he was 9 years old. Um, so, like, what kind of love affair can you have with someone, or what kind of love can you have towards someone at 9 years old? It's going to be childlike and utterly innocent, right? Um, and I don't doubt that like children can like love people, probably not in a romantic sense that we often equate with love in our contemporary culture, but in the sense of like having deep value uh, invested in that person, right? A deep sense of emotional value that you would invest in that person. And so like I don't doubt that part, um, but I don't know what I would call it. I don't know that I would call it love. And I think that that's the point, that if there is something like that that exists, well, it's probably a good example. It's probably a case of love. And so then the question becomes, well, what is love? And so, you know, here we have three uh, definitions of love. We have, you know, love as a volition, we have love as a response, and we have love as a relationship, right? And then when we give this example of Dante, um, we don't have a name for it, right? Love is a infatuation. Love is a value placed, and so if I'm not mistaken, I think that this we're starting to get closer to Stump's Thomistic account of love. Um, and And so now that leaves it up to us try and figure out what that is. Okay. So I promised some well some simulations of these accounts of love, right? Um, and then we talked about some problems with simulating them. So, for instance, if we're going to simulate a responsiveness account of love in Star Citizen, for instance, in order to better understand love, the same way do uh, we would do for like some kind of like let's imagine we're dissecting a frog to better understand the endocrine system or something like that. Okay, so that's the idea, right? We're going to do that in Star Citizen. Star Citizen is our laboratory. Why am I being warned? I'm going to hit something? Okay, where's my hanger? Did it open? Where? Oh, am I in the wrong place? Thought I saw. Yeah, I was totally in the wrong place. Trying to find my hanger, and it was over there. Okay, so if we're going to simulate 3 different accounts of love in a video game, we talked about one way to simulate it, and that would be like the game 1 Hour, 1 Life, right? And there we're not simulating love per se, but we're simulating relying on someone for one's survival. But one way we might think of love is like relying on someone else not for survival, but for meaning, right? And so this is going to be this value account of love. Oh no. Okay. Oops. That's why she was saying warning. Good thing I have my shields up. Okay. Oh no, don't close. Oh, darn it. Oh, it's moving slow as... No. Oh. Turn. Okay, there. Okay. There, it's opening back up. Okay, so we can't really use like the situation presented to us in 1 Hour, 1 Life, right? Just because it feels icky. It seems like we want something more out. You know, when we're talking about value for other people, it's more than just like the practical implications of it, right? And so we're using the term love, and I think that's right. So, like, how would we simulate something like that in Star Citizen? We've got 3 different accounts, right? And what we want to better understand is this intrinsic value that we recognize in another person, and it's a value for our own well-being and gives us meaning or something like that. And I don't think I'm giving away the punchline here by saying that, right? Okay, so a responsive account of love. So how would we simulate that? Let's take what I am doing, for instance. We can get a good external look of my character. And look at me. I am determined, right? Look at, like, I've got this giant ship and all these boxes, and you know, like, it could be the case that what I really want is to go fishing or golfing or something like that. But not really. What I really want to do is get this truck unloaded so that I can get a paycheck and send it home to my family, right? So, I think there's this like implication in Star Citizen that if you work hard enough or you earn enough money or something, you become a citizen. That's why it's called Star Citizen. And so like we are all citizens, and presumably it's because like we have all this money. So whatever we needed to do to become citizens, we've achieved that. But we can imagine that I'm not a citizen and I'm working really hard to become a citizen so that I could better provide for my family. Now, part of that process is, like, I think throughout the course of that process, what happens is that I come to love the country that gave me this opportunity to take care of people, take care of my family, right? And so, like, through the citizenship process, I've developed certain virtues and attitudes and things like that. Well, let's take this virtue of love as a kind of attitude. I've learned how to love people, you know, who I'm not necessarily related to by blood, but just because we're doing life together or something like that. Like, I've learned to see them as more than just like a means to an end. I've learned to think of them more than just in terms of what they could provide for me or do for me. So I'm a citizen, whatever. I'm a Star Citizen. Blah blah blah. Well, that's 50 grand lost, I think. Oh, maybe it's there. Okay, so according to this, look at me. I'm simulating love because I'm working really hard in order to take care of people that I am obligated to taking care of. And it's not like it's not a legal obligation. It's not, it's an obligation. It's an intrinsic obligation. Like, I can't help but do otherwise, right? Well, maybe so is that a proper simulation? Probably not. That's not very good. So let's get this unloaded and try and think of another one we might be able to do. So we're going to try a couple of different experiments using the relational, of simulating the relational account. No, I'm sorry, the responsiveness account of love. So the question then would be, why am I loading boxes off of this ship and placing them into this hangar? Well, it's because there are charges that I love, and then it's like, well, what do you mean you love them? And it's, well, like, I recognize virtues that they possess, and I'm drawn to those virtues, and because I recognize those virtues in them, I am out here unloading this ship. That's not compelling at all. So what else could we possibly do to make the simulation more compelling, right? So we're talking about the responsive account to love. And so, like, another way to perhaps think of a way to simulate the responsiveness account is to say something like, Um, let's imagine a different let's imagine that Beatrice and Dante do know each other. They met in high school. They fell in love, right? And one of the first things that Dante did was ask Beatrice to go to the fair with him, and he had just gotten paid from his job, from his summer construction job, and so he's got, $300. He worked for a week. He's making next to nothing, but of course he's still in high school. He makes next to nothing, and so he has $300 in his pocket. And Beatrice says, "Oh, that's such a beautiful bear," right? And she's pointing to a bear that's hanging in a game stall. And so you all probably know how this goes. It's another pedantic example. But anyway, he spends all $300 trying to win her that bear, and he does. Why? Because he loves her so much that he couldn't help but do otherwise, right? So his winning that bear for Beatrice, or maybe she won it for him, was a response to certain characteristics and virtues that Beatrice possesses, right? And so that's what the responsiveness account says. Now here it is. It's 20 years later, and Beatrice wants she's never told us this much, but we kind of guess what it is that she wants. Anyway, we'll talk more about that.